next session is an amazing bunch of people. Meet three young, wonderful minds working on cutting-edge technologies, including CRISPR, Augmented Reality, and MedTech. It's Ananya, Ben, and Sabarish, and they are here to tell us more about their work in the present, as well as their predictions and plans for the futures. Moderated by the wonderful Lindzon, please welcome to the stage AnanyaC, Chadha, Ben Nashman, and Sabarish Gnanamoorthy. That's a hard one. Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here, and thank you all for coming out to this talk. I'm sure you're here because you want to be humbled, you want to feel old, you want to feel unaccomplished. So you came to see three extraordinarily talented young entrepreneurs showing off some of their latest innovations. Before we get into our discussion, we're going to let each one come up and tell you a little bit about what they're working on. So without further ado, Ananya, please step to the podium and tell us what's going on. I don't know.
No problem. Oh, no. When I was 9 years old, I remember loving the movie Matilda. It's about a little girl who's super smart, who can control objects with her mind. I remember after I watched the movie, I ran all the way home, sat down on my living room floor, and stared at a pen for 20 minutes, desperately trying to get it to write as it did in the movie. Everyone told me that it was impossible to move things with my mind, which makes sense considering the book is fiction. But what's really fascinating is thanks to so much technological development in the past couple of years, controlling things with your mind, that dream has now become a reality. Next slide. Oh, super. This was the first project I built. It's a brain-controlled toy car. So,
and I'll stop the car in 1, 2, 3, stop. And now make the car turn. So, and now the car should stop. And now the car will run forward. And I'll make the car stop in 3, 2, 1.
Thank you. So at a high level, how it works is you're able to read brain signals by placing EEGs on your forehead. EEGs, electroencephalograms, a non-invasive method to track brainwaves which are released when neurons fire action potentials, which is like a current that they fire to propagate signals. You read that information and you get a wave, and then you can send that to a computer, and I program different ML algorithms and transforms like a Fourier transform to be able to extract insights from that data. And then you can program that into outputs of the car, with certain noticeable areas being move the car forward, others being stop, and others being turn the car. So when I did this, for example, the most obvious one was making the car go forward or stop, and that was done with just focusing in almost a meditative-like state, made the car go forward, and then when I was thinking about as much as possible, the car would stop. I've also built prosthetic arms.
This movement, just bringing my thumb and index together. I'll straighten out my fingers. I'll make a fist. And as you can see,
so in this one, I used an EMG sensor, which is kind of similar to an EEG, except it extracts muscle movements. And what got me most excited was because I felt like both of these things actually had possibilities to have impact. Because let's say you didn't have a hand, if you still had that part of your limb, you could track the muscle signals and have an external device propagating what signals you wish to have sent. I've also built brain-controlled MP3 players so you can start and stop music on demand. Hi, everyone. My name is Ananya. I'm a 16-year-old brain-computer interface developer. currently building brain-controlled virtual reality games with the support of some companies like Microsoft. So before I go any further, I just want to share a little bit about brain-computer interfaces. It's pretty much amazing technology that lets you connect your brain to machines or computers. Whenever I talk about this, people like to think of prosthetics because it's something that you see, something that you kind of understand how it works. And this is definitely a large area and part that the industry is focusing on because it's relatively conceivable to do. So most people who actually have disabilities get a brain implant because if you have external electrodes, it generates a lot of noise. And noise is signals that are hard to read because it's so far away from the actual neuron. So if you implant a brain chip or ECOG, then you can pick up direct signals to power a prosthetic. But what really fascinates me about the field is the potential that it'll have in the next 5 to 10 years. Facebook is working on ways to let you type with your brain faster than before. The US military has funded projects to create mood-controlling implants, and they're testing in humans right now. So ideally, if I was in a happy state, they would try to read that state, process the information, and then re-stimulate in a different area to make me feel a different emotion. That's insane. And additionally, a really cool study I want to share has to do with brain-to-brain communication. So there were 2 researchers at the University of Washington. One was playing a game of Tetris. The only catch was that he couldn't see the screen. He had a blindfold on. The other researcher could see the screen, but he wasn't allowed to touch the controller. So what did they do? They picked up information from the researcher looking at the screen in his mind, like, turn this piece, sent it over the internet, processed it, and then stimulated in the other researcher's mind the directions for what to do. And they managed together to play Tetris really well. Brain-to-brain communication is something crazy. Imagine instead of me talking to you all, you guys just already knew. And the crazy thing about it is that a lot of primitive technology in this space is currently being done. And with things like brain-to-brain communication, a lot of people wonder that soon brain-to-internet communication might be conceivable, even though we can't really conceive of it right now. It could be something like talking to Siri through your mind, or maybe something completely different. And with this power, people think that sharing consciousness might be something tangible and feasible that we can do. Companies are actually investing hundreds of millions of dollars into making this technology a reality. Neuralink was started by Elon Musk. He's developing lots of mini piezoelectric sensors to essentially implant into your brain like a mesh. How piezoelectric crystals work, they're used in lighters. If you squish it, it generates a current, and if you send a current through it, then it oscillates. So if you have many, many mini piezoelectric crystals by your neurons, then it will oscillate the piezoelectric crystal when there's a current, so when the neuron fires, and you should ideally be able to map the entire brain. Kernel and Facebook are working on awesome things too. Ray Kurzweil, head of engineering at Google, pretty renowned futurist, founder of Singularity University, thinks that by 2030s, we might just all have brain chips or nanobots to make us smarter, more adaptable, able to learn quickly, a whole bunch of really fascinating things. With a technology this powerful, it's really important that we ask ourselves critical questions. What if your brain could be hacked? What if you were happy, but a third party made you feel sad? If we're trying to optimize humanity for happiness and contentment, is this really the best path to go down? When I first learned about this technology, the reason why I got involved was because it was so scary to me, and I thought that ideally I would like to be big enough in the space to avert the world from disaster. But I realize now that the only way we're going to end up with a future that we all like is if we all add our inputs and understand what's going on. The information I shared with you guys today is all public, but I'm pretty sure that most of you guys weren't aware. And just like brain-computer interfaces, there are many other technologies that are completely going to transform humanity. So I challenge you all to go home, try and learn something new about a field that you never heard of, because I think then we're going to be able to create the best future for all of us. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. And next up, we have Ben.
Say you're walking around a car dealership, and a fancy car salesman comes up to you, and he points you to a beautiful-looking car. And he's a good salesman, so he convinces you to take a step inside. And now you're both sitting in the car, and you're about to turn the key, but you notice something really strange. You notice that you have no information about the tire pressure, whether the doors are closed, even what the gas level is. For some reason, there are no sensors in this car. Most of you wouldn't be too comfortable buying this car. But what's weird to me is that this is how we're living inside our bodies every single day. It's as if we're waiting for our own fuel to run out before we refill it. The way the medical system is set up today is essentially waiting for a problem to occur before we actively address it. We're being too reactive about the way we deal with health, and if we want to optimize ourselves, we have to be more proactive. And the reason we're not doing this is because we don't have enough data about our body. We're essentially chemical machines. So if a problem's going to occur, it's going to begin at the chemical level. And if we want to understand these problems and predict them from occurring before they do, we're going to have to really understand the chemical makeup of our metabolism. But we don't. And this really struck me as a fundamental flaw in the medical system. And I was really concerned by this. But a lot of that started to change when I came across the field of biosensors. So biosensors are kind of like sensors for a car, except they give us data about our own body. Biosensors essentially let us figure out the fuel levels in our own bodies, so we can predict when the gas is going to run out. And using all this data, we can optimize every single aspect about our lives. Everything from improving the prognosis of different conditions or diseases that we have, to optimizing things like our fitness and our nutrition, even quantitatively determining what's the optimal amount of a supplement to take. So how do these things work? Like I said, our body deals with the world of chemistry, but we're not very good at understanding chemistry firsthand. So we need to translate that into something that we do understand, which is electricity. So what a biosensor does is it translates different biological signals into electrical signals. And then using those electrical signals, we can detect and quantify what those original biological signals were telling us. What biomolecules, what metabolites were involved in those interactions. Now, there's hundreds of different types of biosensors. And the first ones to be developed were called chemical biosensors, because these are things that chemically interact with different biomolecules. Now, these have been around for a while, and they've got great sensitivity, and they're very specific, but they're not scalable. And the reason for that is that we're going to have to constantly keep replacing the different chemicals involved, and it's pretty hard to scale a chemical reaction. The next main class of biosensors are physical biosensors. And these are the ones that get me really excited. Now, physical biosensors take advantage of the different physical properties of biomolecules. Things like how they respond to different wavelengths of light, even high-frequency ultrasound or magnetic fields. And these are really scalable. So it seems like they have a lot of potential. Now, when we integrate all these different technologies into a single system, we end up with something called the lab on a chip. And as the name suggests, a lab on a chip has the same analytical power as an entire medical laboratory. This would be like running an entire blood test using a single drop of blood. Just think about that for a second. The implications on the entire medical industry are astounding. But for me, I always wanted to take things a step further. I wanted to see if there was something where we could be the sample. We didn't have to give a sample, we were the sample. Could we perform some sort of analytical test on our own bodies, completely non-invasively? Not only that, could we get this data in real time? Right now, some of the biggest issues is in getting enough data. For example, people with diabetes have to sample their blood at least 5 times a day to get a good measure of their glucose fluctuations. But the issue is, people don't do it enough because, 1, it's painful, and 2, it's not very practical to do all the time. So I looked around, but I didn't see anyone actively working on this solution who was actually getting good results. So I started the company Synex Medical with a mission to make this a reality. And at Synex, we're developing technology that's going to allow for non-invasive blood metabolite monitoring in real time. And the way we do this is we look at the very fundamentals. If we look at what a particle is from a quantum mechanical perspective, we see that it has a property called spin. This isn't like the regular spin that we encounter in everyday life, like spinning a basketball. It's more of an abstract property that we assign to particles based on how they respond in different environments. Now, if a particle has a charge and it has spin, it has something called a magnetic moment. So we can start to think of the particle as really a very tiny bar magnet generating a tiny magnetic field. And what's amazing is that different molecules have different types of magnetic fields. So if we interact with these fields, we can actually get a signature of that molecule. So say we have a mixture of 100 different biomolecules or so. By interacting with the magnetic fields that are in that sample, we can actually characterize and quantify all the different types of molecules in that sample. And what's great about magnetic fields is that they permeate through different types of matter. So this lets us measure things like glucose, cholesterol, vitamins, thousands of different metabolites completely non-invasively. And if we miniaturize this technology, we can actually make all these measurements in real time. So what we're working on right now is miniaturizing this type of non-invasive technology into a wearable device, something on the scale of a watch or a ring that someone can wear and constantly measure all these different metabolites. So I wake up every single day super excited to work on this problem because I realize that our health is one of the most important and valuable assets that we have. With Synex, people with diseases like diabetes and heart disease can better manage their conditions, and people all over the world can take a step to becoming a better version of themselves. And that's a future that I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And last but not least, we have Sabarish. Please come on up.
Okay.
Do you notice that?
No. Ever since the cognitive revolution, humans have been living in a dual reality. On one hand, the objective reality of things that are tangible and real, like the earth, rivers, clouds, and trees. And on the other hand, there's the imagined reality of time, money, and government. As these realities kept progressing, the imagined reality became ever more powerful. As these trees, mountains, and animals all started to depend on big nations and governments. But in the future, using emerging technology, we can move away from this dualistic perspective and move into the era of a tri-reality. Imagine an alternate reality, where everything is based on choice and preference. The sun, earth, rivers, mountains, trees, money, and time is all completely virtual, both objective and imagined at the same time. And the technology that has the power to create this is virtual and augmented reality. Virtual reality is the ability to create new artificial realities within the 3D space and can be viewed within headsets that show 3D customized content. Virtual reality is a billion-dollar industry that is going to impact every business and is growing at an exponential rate right now and is set to be a $75 billion industry in 2021.
A lot of huge companies like Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Google are all working with this technology because they know that it is the future of how humans are going to interact overall. Augmented reality is the ability to alter our existing realities and superimpose digital interfaces on top of our real-world environment. We've been using AR technology for years now in its premature state with applications like Snapchat and Pokemon Go. AR is going to completely replace smartphone technology in the next few years because it is the next biggest consumer technology that is going to start impacting billions. When I saw this huge opportunity with virtual and augmented reality and these alternate realities and how it had the potential to change how the world worked altogether, I wanted to become a part of this revolution and become a pioneer in the future. And my first step towards this journey was to start WaypointAR. WaypointAR is a navigation platform for indoor locations that uses augmented reality and computer vision to make navigation a lot more intuitive. A lot of big companies have been working on navigation for years now, but have focused on outdoor navigation with pedestrians, public transit, cars, but nothing exists right now for indoor navigation. And I saw this problem, and I thought it had a huge opportunity for augmented reality to fill this gap. WaypointAR works within airports, university campuses, malls, museums, and complexes, and basically any large indoor location. When I saw this industry and the amount of applications that are in this industry, I was really amazed. But these are all really small compared to the grand scheme of the impact that can be created with VR and AR. So how about we start talking about how VR and AR can completely transform the world? In my future, my vision for this future is creating a utopia. We've heard this word in science fiction movies like Ready Player One or The Matrix, but we haven't really made a lot of efforts to actually get there, and we've dreamed about it for hundreds of years now, a perfect world. And I think we can start building it right now with virtual and augmented reality. My definition of a utopia is a virtual world where everything is perfect and humans have the ability to shape who they are in the future. Some of the problems that a utopia can solve include cost of housing, education, distance, and identity. Cost of housing can be impacted because inside a virtual world, there's no sense of proximity or distance, and this allows for cost of housing to completely drop. With education, we can finally centralize it in terms of schools, professors, universities, or opportunities, and both cost of housing and education will play a huge part in actually allowing our world to come out of poverty. Distance is another issue that I personally have with my family. My parents, my brother, and I live in Toronto versus the entire rest of my family live in India. Imagine using holographic teleportation to be right in front of our parents or family anytime we want and feel as if we're in front of them without having to travel thousands of miles for it. And the final problem I think it can solve is identity in terms of experiences, because experiences shape who we are as a person and whatever we've experienced during our lifetime. One of history's laws is that luxuries tend to become necessities. Once people get used to a certain luxury, they start to count on it. And I think using virtual reality and a utopia, we can allow for people to gain more empathy and experience life in the shoes of other people that they usually could not experience it in. And this is a really interesting application to allow for our entire society to become more positive and perfect. By 2021, we're going to reach the inflection point of virtual reality, where it's going to become one of the most used technologies in the world. In the future, I want to play a key role in creating this alternate reality, building a utopian future, and pioneering the future of augmented and virtual reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. That was really great. I imagine you're all quite humbled right now, as am I. Just to quickly go down the line, I'm sure you're all wondering, can you please just share your ages? Because I think that just blows my mind. Please.
I'm 15 years old.
I'm 18.
16.
What were you doing at that age? I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about brain interfaces and VR and AR in high school. Where are you learning all of this stuff?
Yeah, so we're learning it at this program called the Knowledge Society, which is a human accelerator program that's built to help exceptional people start solving some of the world's biggest problems. And it's specifically targeted towards high school students. And right now it's based in Toronto. And they're exposing to technologies like VR, brain-machine interfaces, MedTech, AI. And they're all helping us find our passions in this so we can eventually do big things in the space.
That's incredible and making me even more proud to be Torontonian. And at such a young age, you went over it a little bit in your talks, but what really sparked your interest in these areas?
Yeah, I guess for me, I mean, ever since I was a kid, I was always interested in just really advanced topics and things like, I mean, the edge of physics or biotech and all these, I guess, different exponential technologies. And I was lucky enough to get into the Knowledge Society and get exposed to a bunch of these areas that I had no clue about. And eventually, I met a great group of people at one of the nearby hospitals where I live. And I was very generously given the opportunity to intern there, where I worked on next generation medical imaging. And when I was working on that, I started seeing some connections between different areas in that field and also other areas that I previously researched, which kind of led me to start working on what I'm doing now.
Fantastic. And I also really appreciate how you're all very optimistic about where technology is heading in your various fields. Let's start with Sabarish. I mean, you mentioned this a little bit in the beginning of your talk, but right now it seems like the state of AR and VR is sort of in the Pokemon Go world of gimmicks and games. How do you, and you believe that this is going to change the world in some dramatic ways. How do we go from little games on our phone to some of the potential that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I think right now we're all focused on gaming, marketing, advertising, and entertainment right now with VR and AR. And I think that's necessary in the start to actually expose people to that technology, show them something really exciting that will attract them to the technology in the start. But I think also the technology is not there yet to allow for real-world applications right now, and there are not enough people who are working on real-world problems to get there. So I think it's just getting the technology there in terms of headsets or haptic feedback or these different things that will eventually allow for us to solve some of the problems that I talked about in my talk.
All right, and Ananya, talked a lot about, you kind of brushed over this, but I want to go back to it because in spite of all the optimism, it scares me quite a bit. We are already having a lot of problems with password breaches and data privacy. It seems a little crazy that our brains might be hackable in the future. Do you think that considering where we are with just basic, password security, that we're prepared for a future where, the human brain can be hacked?
I feel like anything is definitely possible. However, with the development of all technologies, so if one technology develops, usually you see other technologies also develop in that time frame. So what I think will happen is as brain-computer interfaces become more developed, you're going to see quantum encryption also reach higher levels. So maybe you can protect something using really cool laws of quantum mechanics to make it even harder to get at something. The company Kernel, founded by Brian Johnson, super smart guy, he's looking at the intersection between things like blockchain technology and brain-computer interfaces. I worked at a blockchain company this summer called Consensus, and I learned so much about all the encryption protocols and different ways that people access information. So I think that anything is definitely a possibility, but with the rate, hopefully, of encryption technology, as other technology gets developed, hopefully we'll end up figuring out a way to attribute your brain information to you and let you share it if you wish, but only let you share it if you wish.
Love the optimism once again. And Ben, you're working on wearable technology that can basically tell you everything you need to know. I like the comparison to the the dashboard of the car. Do you think we're soon approaching a point where every piece of clothing we have on us is doing something besides keeping us warm and making us look good?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that the idea that everything we wear and everything we kind of take for granted right now can benefit us in some way that we can't even think about right now. I think it's a very exciting future just because, one, with all the data we get from that, the predictions we can make about diseases like cancers and some of the worst diseases that are affecting us today. I mean, it's pretty incredible where we can go from that.
And Ananya, you've spoken quite a bit about how it's so important for everybody in tech to understand what's going on in this space, despite what sort of corner of the tech industry that they're working in. Why do you believe that so strongly? Why do you think that, sort of whatever your niche is in the technology industry, you should try and have a working understanding of things that might not directly impact that niche?
I think the only way we're going to get the best future for humanity is if we have a lot of smart people working on solving tough problems. And I think the only way we're going to be able to solve these problems in a way that adds value to human society, that creates a world that we want to live in, is if we're all aware of the tools that we have available to us to solve really tough problems. So there are really fascinating companies that are working on problems with the tools of like the intersection of two technologies. Deep Genomics in Toronto is a company using machine learning and genetics to try and find ways to create new drugs. Whereas kernel, blockchain, and brain-computer interfaces, there's a whole bunch of, Consensus actually acquired a space exploration company, so space and blockchain. There's so many intersections that happen at the forefront of two technologies or even three coming together. And I think that just shows that if you're aware of all the tools you have available to use, then you can find really interesting use cases and ways to add value and solve really tough problems. So that's the first reason. And then the second part is that a lot of questions surrounding ethics and how we want to create our ideal future are really hard things to answer. Humanity doesn't even know what is a good human. And we create these societal structures to tell us things like what is a good human, but for things we don't have societal structures for, like would you rather spend 24 hours in a virtual VR world that makes you super happy all the time, or do you have some value for real life? And those are questions that different people have different opinions on. And the only way we're going to get a world where we all feel comfortable living in is if everyone adds their point of view or is at least aware of where these technologies are going. Because a lot of these crazy world-changing technologies are operating in stealth mode, giving them the ability to do whatever they want, which is kind of cool and kind of scary. So yeah, for two reasons, lots of opportunity at intersections, and it's important so we understand what world we want to live in.
And to take that a step further, I mean, it seems like each of your individual projects somewhat touch on the others. There's a little bit of overlap there. And because you're all working together with the Knowledge Society and you're all in the same city and you're kind of working side by side, can you maybe tell us a little bit about how you're helping each other out, or you're perhaps helping each other understand the technologies that you guys are particular experts in?
Yeah, so I guess kind of like Ananya was touching upon, a lot of the technologies that we're starting to see come around today, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between the way we do things. For example, in brain-computer interfaces, one of the most common ways to get data is through electroencephalography, EEG, and that's just another, you can think of that kind of like a biosensor, which is the field I work in. It's a way to acquire data from a person. And if we want to improve, say we want to really improve the way we get data from brains to improve how we develop brain-computer interfaces, we're going to have to learn how to acquire better data. So we're going to have to learn how to develop better biosensors. So there's ways that different fields can help each other out, with each one improving on its own. I guess kind of like, I guess a good analogy would be the buyer and the seller in economics, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're talking about things that are on the horizon but not here yet. And I'm curious to know what you see as the biggest barrier to, the future that you're imagining. And so we'll go one by one. Sabarish, VR headsets right now, not very widely used, at least not nearly as ubiquitous as other technologies like smartphones or even smartwatches. How does the VR industry get over that hump? Is it by having more applications? Is it by having better hardware? Is it a combination of the both? How do you see us moving to a future where AR and VR are a lot more common than they are today?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. Right now, virtual reality doesn't really have a balance of both form and function at all. And on the function side of things, it's not able to do a lot of the things that we expect for our devices to do. With smartphones, we basically expect it to do literally anything we ask it to do, and we've basically got that technology in our hands now, and we immediately expect that when we put on this virtual world type of thing around us. And I think we really need to develop applications that people can actually use, but that's also an issue with the hardware and what we're actually wearing. And again, the technology just isn't there right now to actually get it to large consumer use and adoption, but it's going to eventually get there. And as different companies, like recently in Toronto, a company called North released a really, really small AR glass, which basically looks like a glass. You wouldn't really notice that there's actually augmented reality on it. And I think we're slowly starting to make advancements like that to eventually get to that future. And obviously, there's tons of money in the industry right now with companies like Magic Leap, Facebook's in it. Microsoft has over 10 headsets in the entire mixed reality space. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more advancements in the next few years, especially after we start miniaturizing these headsets and also start building useful applications that people want to start using.
Yeah, let me ask you this. What do you think, and I know this is a tough one, but what do you think will be the first killer app for AR and VR? The thing that makes everyone go out and say, I need to get a headset or need to be able to use this. And let me qualify that by saying not a game, because gaming is kind of cheating in this realm.
Yeah, so I don't think gaming is the killer app for sure. I think it has to be, so I don't know specifically what that is, but I know it has to be something in the social space and how people can interact socially. Right now, things like alt space VR exists, but all the humans are basically like Minecraft creatures essentially, and it isn't real at all and doesn't really encourage people to actually interact. But I think it has to be some type of social interaction. Right now we have Snapchat, which is 2D. Obviously the next obvious movement for that is into the 3D space and allowing for communication in 3D. And if we can allow that through things like with the HoloLens holoportation, which allows for another person from across the world to be right in your environment. And as we make advancement in haptic feedback, which is the ability to touch, feel, sense different things in virtual reality, because that's not possible right now, and it makes experiences really awkward when you have like a musical experience, you're trying to hit the drum, but it just doesn't work.
Right.
Things like that make it really hard to actually get the full experience, and when we're able to get all those components together, I think a social app is going to be that killer app which will attract everyone into VR and wanting to start to use it.
Fantastic. Ben, to go back to that question about the biggest roadblock right now, I'm sure that anyone who has taken a blood test, and especially those who have to do it regularly to prick themselves, are dying for something that's non-invasive. Obviously, we're not there yet. There's a lot of potential for the future, as you discussed. How do we get over the hump? How do we get to the point where pricking yourself isn't necessary anymore?
Yeah. So the way, kind of like I described in what I said before, biosensor needs to pick up a signal from the biomolecule that we want to look at. And there's two main things we have to accomplish when we do that. One is specificity, and one is sensitivity. So specificity is basically saying, are we measuring what we think we're measuring? You could generate some sort of spectrum, and if you see a peak in that spectrum, you could say, oh, that corresponds to vitamin D. But can you really know that? What if it's something else? So there's a lot of, the reason working with biological systems is so complex is because there's so much going on. So whenever you look at some sort of, whenever you look at a signal from an entire mixture, from for example, an arm or something, you're going to see a bunch of signals overlapping, and it becomes hard to tell what's what. Not only that, but because there's so many things going on, it's hard to even distinguish something from everything else. So in terms of, is it sensitive enough to pick up something small? Like hormones are generally in the nanomolar and even sometimes picomolar concentrations, which are basically, it's around, I guess, 1 trillion times less than water. So it becomes very hard to pick up certain types of biomolecules. And those are the two main hurdles in developing good biosensors right now. And especially when you're working with non-invasively, it becomes very difficult to tackle those. And that's one of the biggest challenges we've been having. But we've developed some really interesting ways to get around that, and so far, all the results are on track.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Ananya, and you folks might not know this, but you have another area of interest as well. If brain-computer interfaces wasn't cool enough, you've spent the last couple of years working on CRISPR. In a nutshell, can you tell us what that's all about, and again, what the big hurdles are right now in that space? And just to put this, to emphasize this, when people talk about CRISPR, it seems like 99% of the world has no idea what it is, and 1% is ecstatic, like crazy about it. So just give us a quick overview of what that's all about, and yeah, what you've done in that space as well.
Cool, yeah. So I spent 2 years in Toronto working at a gene editing lab, at the Cone Lab at Synex Hospital, and I learned a ton about CRISPR, which is this CRISPR-Cas. It's this really cool gene editing technology. It was discovered recently, 2012, by Jennifer Doudna at UC Berkeley, and it's pretty much a really cool technology that lets you edit the genome, so DNA of humans, of animals, to make edits to change things. So your DNA codes for proteins, which just shows phenotypes or outputs for how your body is. So let's say you have a mutation in your DNA, it can oftentimes lead to a disease. So what people are doing is they're trying to scan the genome for mutations, and then when they see a mutation, they can take this handy-dandy tool called CRISPR. So what CRISPR is, it's like a find. So the CRISPR part is like, find where in the genome I'm looking for. So you order a guide RNA that has the sequence that's mutated or in that area. So you get your guide RNA, and it searches the entire genome for the part that you want to edit, and then it finds it, and then it binds on, because it's complementary. And once it's bound, the Cas9 can then cut. So you find where you want to cut, and then you get there, and you stick to it, and then you cut. And just this simple find and cut mechanism allows you to do really, really interesting things. And the lab that I worked at managed to cure muscular dystrophy in mice using CRISPR. People have been able to cure blindness using CRISPR and cure a whole bunch of other diseases. And it's this really efficient, great technology. The really quick problem, before I run out of time, is that people are still working on how to make it more efficient. So what happens is you send your CRISPR-Cas in a phage, so in a bacteriophage, to try and attack the cells that it wants to penetrate and edit. So once you have the phage that goes around looking for cells, it only reaches the desired cell, let's say 2% of the time. And then once the CRISPR-Cas enzyme is in the cell, it only makes the proper cut about 1% of the time. So now you have some really, really small percentage of genes that actually get edited. So for some diseases like muscular dystrophy, a really small percent change in gaining back ability will show huge phenotypic benefits. Whereas for other diseases, you need to change most of the DNA to show benefits. So that's why loads of companies are working on more effective ways, like little nano robots, or lots of different ways to try and get CRISPR to different cells and then make edits really effectively. But it's a super cool industry, just like all the other ones. So you should all go learn about that too.
All right, well, we're just about out of time, so thank you, all three of you, once again, for coming on out here. Thank you all very much for coming out as well. Thanks, guys. All right. Let's go.